This is a presentation that I'm going to call Don't Be a Dork, and that is probably the dorkiest picture that's ever been taken of me. I think I'm 12 there on a school trip, and the whole aim of the trip was to catch a chicken on a farm. And everyone caught a chicken, and I was chickenless. And then I saw one that wasn't moving very fast. It turned out to be a very sickly chicken, and I picked it up, and that is my proudest moment as well. So dorkiest picture, proudest moment. I'm going to talk to you today, though, about interviewing, and the one thing that really kind of holds me back sometimes with interviewing is my dorky nature. I'm quite clumsy, and I'm clumsy with words sometimes, and you have to sort of overcome these things to get the best out of the interviews that you do with people. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself first. I was born in Norwich. Norwich is the sign up there, a very fine city, as you can see. I grew up in the best pub in Norwich there. My parents are a sailor and a nurse. Because of my dorky nature, I collected thimbles for quite a long time. I also joined chess club, and I found out that I have 4 kidneys, which is a bit strange. So that's a little bit about me. That was my mainly early life. And then I grew up and retained my dorky nature, but actually joined a band in high school. It became a band called the Brownies. I actually started out just practicing with my friends and finding something to do at the weekends. And we ended up playing lots of shows. I mean, I'm not going to big us up, but we've done quite a few good things. We've recorded a big album. That's Andy Gill there. I don't know if you know Gang of Four, a sort of big band from the 80s. We recorded with him, played lots of shows. That's our album there. And from that, I ended up doing a lot of interviews with people, being interviewed by magazines, sometimes TV, lots of radio, and making a lot of mistakes along the way. One of the greatest interviews that I had was for the BBC in Norfolk, and it's a show called BBC Introducing. And if you know what that is, then great, but if not, BBC Introducing is a radio show which happens on BBC Radio 1 in the UK. But it's also regionalised, so you have it all throughout the UK in all the different regions. And it feeds through new music to the main national radio. So it's a really great platform for sort of new bands. We ended up having an interview on BBC Introducing in Norfolk, and the producer, Gary Stanley, who's actually talking later, and he's sat right there, really liked my voice and said to me, why don't you come back and do some presenting? And I was busy touring, so I didn't get back to him. And 6 months later, I didn't have anything to do, so I emailed Gary and thought, that's a great opportunity, I'll have a go at it. And I loved it. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I've never got such a thrill from talking to people and presenting music and really being involved in other people's stories. And from the flip side of all of it is that I have been interviewed a lot of times, but I've now also given a lot of interviews, and most of the time, it's with bands and new bands. So that's where I'm coming from. There's a little picture of me on a microphone there, just to prove I actually do it, and I'm not making this up. So, I mean, it's what I can tell you, I guess, today. I need to tell you that I have been doing this for a few years now. I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, but I'm learning constantly. I'm only 23, and I don't know where I want to go with it. I don't know what I want to do. I'm really enjoying it at the moment, but I just wanted to impart some tips and tricks that I've learned along the way, and which has gotten me more interviews and more radio time. So I think it's really important to know how to get the best out of somebody in an interview, how to get their story and to portray it well and to help them, because that's what you're doing. I mean, when it comes to new bands anyway, you're trying to get them onto the next platform or to get them to a bigger audience, and it's really your responsibility to help them out in what I do anyway. On the flip side, I want to also talk about, when I've been interviewed, how important it is to really think about the story that you're giving someone, because they can only work with what they've got, and if you don't give them what you want to portray, there's no point in being interviewed. So I'll first talk about what I do when I'm going to interview someone. And research seems really obvious, I know. but it's integral. It's the key to your confidence in an interview. The only thing that backs up what you're saying is what you know. And if you don't know anything, you just sound shallow, and people won't listen to you, they won't respect you, and you become a poor interviewer. So you have to do your research. But it's important, but I don't think it's the most important thing about interviewing. I think you need to know your facts about the person you're talking to. So with a band, it's important to know how many albums they've released and what they're called. But you don't have to tell them that in the interview. You don't need to bring it up and say, oh, your album from 1968 was a fantastic hit. How do you feel about it now? I think that makes quite a dry interview. But you really need to know who you're talking to, because then you can get a sense of their story and you can pull more from the person. I also think research is so important because, especially with the internet, if you want to interview a band and you go onto the internet and you pull up lots of relevant information, and then you go and do an interview and you ask them questions where they'll just be giving you the same information, what are you giving to your audience? They already know how many albums they've had out. They know how they feel about their latest album. They know where it was recorded. They know when it's going to be released. So what are you actually adding to the story? You're not really adding anything. What you can do from research, though, is get a sense of the person and perhaps ask more personal questions when it comes to the interview. So one method of research that I really like to do these days is to pre-interview. So if I know I'm going to talk to an artist or a band, I will call them a few days beforehand and have a chat with them and see what kind of person they are and test the waters, really, see how far they will let me push them and how I can talk to them, how intimately I can talk to them. I also then know if they're going to be nervous on the night, so I'm really catering for their needs. I think that phoning people before you talk to them is incredibly important, and it also helps that you don't have to then assume information about the person when they come. I'll come on to that later. There's quite an embarrassing clip, which I would like to play you. It's also, of course, really important to actually know what you want to know. Again, it sounds very simple, but I have so often gone into an interview thinking, oh, well, I better ask about the fact that they've done a video recently and it was recorded in this fantastic place, and so on and so forth. I feel like I know what I ought to ask, but really, people are just the same as you. So sometimes I've gone into an interview and all I want to know about that person is, whether they've ever had a fist fight with their bandmate, or, I don't know, things which are a bit more intimate than you would expect in an interview. So be led by your own curiosity and your own intuition, and don't follow set formulas, because you're just repeating what's already out there. You're not testing the person that you're talking to either. You're not giving them something that they've not had before. They're expecting those questions from you. So really think, what don't you know about this person? What don't you think they're going to say? And try and drag it out of them instead. Which leads me to, you got to suck it out of them. That sounds a bit gross, but it doesn't really matter how you suck it out of them. This is sounding even more gross, I know. But you can do it in person, you can do it on the phone, you can Skype them, you can do any kind of research before you go to your interview. But actually in the interview itself, it doesn't matter where you are. I have a lot of phone interviews when I'm on the radio, and it might seem that you can't be as intimate with someone on the phone, but you can. You've just got to do your research and really talk to them in a very honest and intimate way when they're on the phone. It's all up to you. They might feel far away from you. They might be miles and miles away from you. Might be on the other side of the world, but you can still have that intimacy. You've just got to sort of suck it out of them. This is quite self-explanatory, but if you feel comfortable, that's important. But it's so important that your guest or the person that you're interviewing is comfortable. Because when someone's comfortable, their guard's down. And whether they know it or not, they're going to let more out of themselves for you, and that's great for your interview. So, for example, on our radio show, which we have every week, it's an hour long, we have the guest come in way before they need to actually be on air, and we have a sort of team of volunteers who pamper them, and they get, sort of a jester almost, someone that can entertain them, cups of tea and coffee and all of that kind of stuff, standard stuff. but you've really got to make your guest or the person that you're interviewing feel like all you want to do is be in their company and interview them. You don't want them to think that you're rushed because you've only got 3 minutes left to interview them. You want to make them feel like they're really special and that they're there because they are so interesting, which that should be the case anyway. But you've really got to set it up so that they're going to give you the most of what they've got. And don't be afraid to kind of try and crack that shell once you've got them comfortable. I'm not a very honest person when it comes to asking the questions that I want to ask. Sometimes I'd feel a bit intimidated and I think, I can't ask them whether they've ever cried when performing because they'll think I'm being rude. But you've just got to find a way, a very personable way of coming in and approaching someone and asking them what you want to ask without offending them. You've got to be really tactful. So once you've done that, you have to really, you've got the basic principles of getting a good interview from someone. And that's great. You'll have a great interview. But there's so many interviews now. When you're online, you've got them through a variety of channels. You can watch whatever you want on YouTube. You can listen to whatever you want. You can flick through every radio station and listen to 100 interviews a day if you want. And what stands out is stuff that doesn't happen often or is irregular or something that you can do which hasn't been done before. So I'm going to play you a couple of videos now. And I'm not professing to be the most imaginative person in the world, but these are things that have worked for us quite recently. So this is a man called Mark Jennings, and he is a massive character in himself. He performs quite electronic, crazy music that you try to dance to, and then you can't because he just changes rhythms all the time. He's very eccentric, and when he performs in a Wendy house, and he jumps out of the window sometimes and screams in people's faces. But he's a really nice chap, and he just sits there, and he's like, "Oh, how are you, Mark?" "Yeah, I'm fine, thanks. I'm really good. I've had a cheese sandwich today, and yeah, I'm great." So if I'd have done that, if I'd have brought him in and spoken about his new album and sat him across from me, it would have been a great interview. He's a lovely chap, and I would have enjoyed watching it back because I've seen him live, but no one else is going to get that. And so have a watch of this. This is what we did. I should mention as well that with our radio show, we film it, so it's kind of a little bit like TV, but on YouTube as well. So this is from his new album, Get in the Tent. That's Scoshy and Charlie's Nose. And Mark, a.k.a. Scoshy, I've just told him to get in the tent because right now, in these very studios here, Mark, who is Scoshy, is in a tent.
Hello.
Hiya.
Hello.
The beauty of this is, if you go to YouTube after tonight's up, you can watch this. You can watch him talk in a tent. It's simple magic, is what I'd call it.
That's the future.
What do you think? So you, Mark, I know you as Mark, but I know you as Scoshy. I know you as Master Solo and one part of Giant Robot on the City of Tokyo, and so much more as well. The list just goes on, doesn't it?
I've done a couple of bands here and there.
I've been around. What have you been... So you can see what I mean. He's very sort of docile, very nice guy, very nice chap. And just by describing that, the fact that he's in a tent in the studio, it gives you a picture if you're listening, and you think, oh my God, if you want to go and watch it online, you can have a look. It's simple. It's not like the most riveting thing you've ever seen, but it makes a hell of a better interview than if I'd have just sat him there and spoken about his new album. So that's Scoshy, in case you want to look him up. I had the pleasure of interviewing Frank Turner last summer at a festival called Playfest. And the problem with it was that we had this really great setup to the side of the stage that we were at. We had these amazing, well, actually they were quite rank, sort of cushions with bugs on and stuff, but and it was plush and looked lovely. We had a film set. We kept inviting our guests in, and it looked great. We had a great lighting, And the problem with it was that there was absolutely no soundproofing whatsoever. So we had about 5-minute gaps in between each band playing to do interviews, and it just wasn't working. And some of the interviews we could rearrange, but Frank Turner was one of the biggest artists playing this weekend, and he couldn't rearrange. So instead, we kind of thought, what are we going to do? You know, we can't let this interview slip through our fingers. So instead, we decided to... I'm sat in a Jeep with Frank Turner at Playfest.
Hello.
Like, I never thought this would happen.
Nor did I. But it's what a lovely place to do an interview. It's a nice Jeep.
I think so. Yeah, quite a lot of equipment in here.
It's a little bit cramped. I would like to be able to put the seat back a little, to be honest with you. I've got long legs, but apparently it doesn't go.
I would always try and accommodate you, but I don't think it's going to go that
That's
way.
very kind of you.
So we put him in, I called it a Jeep, it's actually a Land Rover. Do your research. But he loved it. He absolutely loved it. Thought the idea was great, and although you can still hear a bit of the sound outside, we worked with the situation that we had. I'm going to keep playing this for a bit because I stumble a little bit and I ask him a weird question, but I actually get a really good answer. Okay. I don't know if this is going to play. But I don't think it's going to go that way.
That's very kind of you.
So
I'll survive.
Okay, good. Well, just thought briefly, as we're in a Jeep, if you could go anywhere in the world right now in this Jeep, where would you want to go?
Well, I could be cheesy and say, there's nowhere I'd rather be. Well, you know, I've got a festival to do, so I need to stay here for a little. It's got to be somewhere where I can drive there and back in a couple of hours.
That's true. What if it was like a super Jeep and you could go anywhere?
Montana.
Really?
I'm going to move to Montana one day.
Why is that?
Because it's amazing.
What's so amazing about it?
It's incredibly beautiful and wild and empty, and you can live a free life untrammeled by other people out there, which is what I wish to do one day.
Have you played like a lot of meaningful shows there? So, I know I stopped it quite quickly there, but basically I've just got out of him that one day he wants to live in Montana. I've never read that on the internet anywhere. I don't think I've ever heard him say it since. And if you're a big fan of Frank Turner, I think that's quite an interesting thing. So even though I didn't say it very eloquently and I took my time to say it, I sometimes just think it's worth having a conversation with someone rather than thinking that you have to be slick and smooth and ask questions that don't pop into your head. So there's that one. Whilst I've got these videos up, I thought I would just show you this. This is my favourite interview of all time. Have you seen it? Has anyone seen this before? If you have, I'm just going to play it so you enjoy it. But if you haven't, it's amazing. Basically, it's a beauty pageant from 2007, I think. And it's Miss South Carolina, and she gets asked a question, but I think maybe nerves or something that I'm going to come on to in a second, something I'll talk about is nerves. Or I don't really know what gets the better of her, but something does, and she sort of, I don't even know what she's saying, but it does make for the best interview ever. And also, if you've ever watched Saved by the Bell, just have a look at who asks the question.
Recent polls have shown a fifth of Americans can't locate the U.S. on a world map. Why do you think this is?
I personally believe that U.S. Americans are unable to do so because some people out there in our nation don't have maps, and I believe that our education, like such as in South Africa and the Iraq, everywhere like such as, and I believe that they should, our education over here in the U.S. should help the U.S. or should help South Africa and should help the Iraq and the Asian countries, so we will be able to build up our future for our.
Thank you very much, South Carolina.
So, bless her, because even though she wasn't quite prepared for that, I don't think, it's one of the funniest bits of interviewing I've ever seen. I might come on to another video I've got later, but for the moment I'm going to go back to the presentation. You can tell I'm not very computer literate because I'm going to have to start at the beginning and fast forward. So I've spoken about myself. I've spoken about what I think makes for giving a good interview. And I've got some sort of common themes which arise both when you're interviewing someone and when you're being interviewed as well. And one of them is nerves. I always suffered from nerves, part of my dorky nature, and I still do. But I think if you suffer from them on both sides, if you're interviewing someone and you're overwhelmed by the person that you're interviewing because they're so amazing, or perhaps you're being interviewed and you don't know what you're going to get asked and you want to come across well because your new album's out or whatever, it happens to everyone, and nerves can get the better of you, like in Miss South Carolina's case. But I think that it's one of the worst sort of things I can say is just it's simple, but it is. What's the worst that can happen? You know, so what? You stumble like Miss South Carolina. She's had like millions and millions of hits on YouTube. She might not have won that year. I don't know if she did or not. But, you know, what's the worst that can happen in that situation? What's the worst that can happen in any situation? You can't think of anything to say, so you stumble for a bit, and then you'll say something, and it won't sound as bad as you think. I would just say, chill out. It doesn't matter. Don't put all your eggs in a basket, basically. That's my little thing on nerves. The other thing I would say is pretend to be confident, because I don't think anyone actually is confident, and if you are, you're lying, because I think everyone pretends to be confident. And it's so much easier to act than it is to actually be sometimes. So be bravado and be like the kitten looking at himself as a lion. Another theme between the two things about interviewing someone and being interviewed is to slow down. I suffer from this a lot. I like to ramble and I like to do it fast. But if you slow down, and you slow down to what feels like a really unnatural pace, like I am doing right now, it's actually a very natural pace. When you've got adrenaline in your system, when you're interviewing someone or when you're being interviewed, all you want to do is get what's in your head out as quick as possible. But you don't need to do it all at once. You just need to take your time, slow down, keep things at a snail pace, and it'll all come out. The other thing is as well, as a radio interviewer, you work very much to time when you're doing live interviews. I'd much rather ask 2 really good questions, take my time and have my guests take their time, than ask 10 questions which feel cut up and move into one another because we're both nervous and speaking really fast, and the audience doesn't even understand us in the end anyway. So I think it's definitely worth taking your time. Okay. So now I'm moving on to actually being interviewed yourself. There's not that much that I can really say about this, because when you're being interviewed, it's such a different approach to interviewing someone. When you're interviewing someone, you're really listening to the answer, you're listening to your question, you're thinking about it a lot. When you're being interviewed as a guest, what you're really thinking about are your own thoughts. You're not thinking about the question, you're not thinking about how the interviewer feels, you're just indulging yourself a lot of the time. I do anyway. But you have to be able to give the best of yourself. And I don't think that means bragging at all. I don't think it means saying, I've done this and I've climbed Everest and I don't know, anything like that. You don't need to do that. You don't need to tell them what you've done. You just need to be yourself, but be a really confident version of yourself, and let people extract stuff from you. Give them signposts to what you've done. Say, I've done a bit of this, I've done a bit of that, and let them ask you. You don't have to stampede in. In terms of preparing to be interviewed, you can think about what you are going to be asked. For example, I keep using band references because I mainly do interview bands, but if you've had a new album out, if you've been recording a video, if you've just been on tour in Bulgaria, if you've done anything like that, you've kind of got a bit of an intuition about what they might ask you, what the interviewer might ask you. Have a little think about it, and, perhaps prepare a little bit, but I would say don't over-prepare. I get people come into the radio studio with literally pages of stuff that they want to get through and have it all written down in sentences, and I've got 30 seconds to do a really quick interview with them because things are running over. They'll say one thing off that sheet, I'll say, thanks very much, see you another time, and they leave really disappointed. I think about what you're going to get asked, but expect anything, especially when it comes to live interviews. And when you're not as well, you don't know what they're going to ask you. There is no point in coming in with bullet points of things that you want to get through and gigs that you want to mention and, you know, upcoming releases. If you've got stuff that you want to tell people, put it online, put it somewhere that you can signpost, put it on your Facebook or whatever you use and say, just another really quick thing. Go to my Facebook, you'll see all these bits and pieces. It's useless information. If they're going to find it online anyway, you're just wasting your time. If you are part of a group or there are a lot of you, always nominate somebody to do the talking, because there is nothing more irritating than 7 voices talking over one another and not making sense. It's so frustrating because you can't hear anything. You don't really know what's coming next. The audience gets confused. So pick your best speaker, and they can do most of the talking, but they also have to be able to signpost. So if I ask a question like, if you had to pick a favourite sandwich as a band, what would it be? And Jeff is the nominated leader of the band. If Jeff knows that Sam actually has a love of sandwiches, he can point to Sam. And Sam can say, well, our favourite sandwich is actually a croque monsieur, not really a sandwich. Or whatever. Oh, that's a bad example. But you need somebody that can act as your leader. You come across so much better when you seem uniformed and you seem prepared and you're not all rambling at once. Also, tell the full story. I often find myself doing this, where I'm so familiar with what I've already done in my band that I'll go into an interview and just start slap bang where we are right now. And people, well, what's your band's name? I think, oh yeah, by the way, it's, you know, the Brownies. And, you know, the album that was really great was, oh, what's that album? Oh yeah. And you don't sound like you know what you're talking about. I don't think you need to go into a massive backstory of what you do. I think you just need to be able to be aware that people are listening to you for the first time in a lot of cases. So it makes no sense whatsoever to start in the middle. You have to tell the story from start to end. You can do it in one sentence. You know, I've been going as an artist for 6 years, but now I'm working on something else or whatever. The other massive thing is don't assume. And one of my favorite phrases is don't make an ass out of you and me. Because I assume things all of the time and look like an idiot. In fact, do you know what? I'll come to that video now. I'll show you it. This is an interview I did not too long ago. And I know the artist very well. He's called Janobi. I'll play you the first bit of the interview because it starts out really well. Was Janobi, and you should have shown me. And Jano, hi.
Hello.
Come on forward. Don't be shy.
Hello,
the yellow
hello.
microphone loves you.
Yeah, of course.
I just want to jump straight into it. That song that we just played is so open and honest. Is it difficult to write in that kind of style? Does it come naturally to you?
It does come naturally because it's me, like, you know, I tell my story, like, from my music, most of it. But this one was I think it's my favourite song from Times, and it probably will always be my favourite song, like, as a song, because it has the most value. There's another one similar, but it has more of, like, value and more meaning to me, you know?
Yeah. Do your family kind of share in the music that you make? Because that is such a personal song.
Well, it's a bit weird because it's just me with this dad, you know, like, I was the only one from this dad, like, my mum from a previous marriage had 4 kids, and then I was the only one. I don't have a whole brother, a whole sister, but he up and left, kind of, you know. So it's a bit.
That must be so difficult.
Yeah, it was then. I'm alright now. I'm grown, you know, but it really was a bit tough and growing up still, looking for the father figure, like.
Yeah. So. I think as you grow up, though, I mean, those kind of things really shape who you become, don't they?
Yeah,
and it's
definitely.
Obviously a massive influence on your music.
Definitely.
So what else kind of influences your music in that way?
Well, if not that I want to talk about, like, I did a song the other day. It's if you check on my, like, YouTube and that.
Yeah.
About my sister, you know, I feel the only thing I can do when I'm thinking too much or I'm a bit stressed, I write, you know. Unfortunately, rest in peace to my little sister, 18 years old. She died 4 months ago.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That's horrible.
Yeah, and I wrote a song talking about her because she was my dad's daughter as well. Yeah, but I didn't really get to spend too much time with her, you know, so I missed that. But I express it on my music. That's how I can express myself, I think, really. So do it then.
And that's what makes it so... So I left that running for quite a while, but actually, I don't know if you caught what he was saying. He sort of muffles a lot. Always be, you know, very clear about what you're saying. But he was talking then about a song that he's written about his sister that died. I wasn't expecting that at all. I had no idea that he'd written one like that. I knew that the song that he'd played then was very personal, and I asked him about that, and I sort of cracked the shell a little bit, but I didn't want to push it too far, and he really opened up about it and did, you know, it was a really great answer to a question. So that's quite a sad answer to get, but this isn't so much sad, it's just embarrassing. Let me fast forward. So a little bit later in the interview, I ask him a question, and I totally assume who he's brought with him. I make an ass out of you and me, or in this case, me and him.
He's not my real uncle, but yeah. Well.
Oh. And tell me as well about your tie with Interim Records, because I can see that CJ has sat me. We've had CJ in before.
Well, cool, Slim. That's Slim Joe.
Sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Interim. Well, yeah, when Interim.
I totally just mistook someone for someone completely different, live on air. People that I should know who they are as well. And it's because it was a busy night. I'd welcomed him into the studio, but I hadn't even acknowledged the guests that he was with. I hadn't taken any time to research the environment that I was in or the people that I was going to bring into that environment, into the interview. And the reason that it doesn't look that embarrassing when you watch it is because our wonderful volunteer who edited this, I sat next to him and completely and utterly would not let him pan to my face when I asked that question, because I went a beetroot red. It was the reddest my face has ever gone, and it stayed that way for a good couple of minutes. And the crux of the issue is, it wasn't just that one embarrassing moment. You can skim past them, you can move on, it's not the end of the world, it doesn't make the interview terrible. But it totally threw me off. The whole thing I could think about for probably for the rest of that show actually, the rest of the hour was, I can't believe I mistook that guy for someone else and said it on air. And you're just half doing stuff, you're not really thinking about what you're doing. So it's always worth just double checking stuff. No one cares if you double check. I should have said in that room, hey, you're from Interim Records. And he could have said, no, I'm not. Anyway, don't make an ass. I've got a little bit more to do. By the way, if you want to ask questions at any time, I feel like I'm just yelling in your ear. Okay. So the other thing I sort of touched on as well is when you're being interviewed, I think some people are very open and will tell you anything. Some people are too open and will tell you anything. And some people are very closed and cagey. And you yourself need to decide how much you're willing to let out of yourself and tell people about. And you need to decide that before you get interviewed. Some interviewers will be very conscientious. They won't push anything. They'll just ask you questions you're expecting. They'll probably tell you what questions you're going to be asked. Some interviewers will want to throw you off course so much that they will just stick something out there, and you'll have about 2 seconds to think about it, and then you'll be expected to answer it. And I've had that happen in interviews before, when people have asked me stuff, and my dorky nature just leads me to say stuff that I really don't want to share or don't want to say, or perhaps is inappropriate to say, or they're asking me my thoughts about something, and because I can't think what my thoughts are, I'll just say anything. And then it's out there for people to watch, read, listen to. And I've just said something that I totally don't believe in. And it's probably a serious issue. And that's available for people to digest for however long they want to. So you need to think, if you don't want to talk about politics, if you don't want to talk about your personal life, if you don't want to talk about your views on gay marriage or anything like that. You need to decide that before you get interviewed or before you put yourself in that situation, because then you've got your guard up and you've got your line drawn, and as soon as someone asks you that, you can say, that's fine, I'll move on. I'm not going to go past that line. So it's very important. Non-live interviews, I want to quickly touch on this. Obviously, you've kind of got pre-recorded interviews that you can do. I've had interviews before where you record them and then you can write them up. With those two, I'd say everything that I've spoken about, I use the things I've spoken about. I'd use the basic principles. When it comes to things like email submission interviews, so you're responding to questions by email or Twitter, it's a totally different ballgame because you can completely think about and prepare what you want your answers to be. So, I'm used to a very live environment, but you can use it for pre-records or anything you like. My final sort of thought on the whole thing I've said is be yourself, be in control of yourself and of your situation, and be confident, pretend to be confident, and